Good afternoon, or depending on where you are in the world as we're coming from Europe, good morning, good evening. Thank you again for joining us. My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Stephen Wall. I'm co-founder of the Wealth Mosaic. This is another one of the WealthTech talk sessions that we run across the wealth management, wealth tech industry to explore topics and to go into a conversation with players in the space. So thanks for joining us. Just a bit of admin. We'll be online now for roughly an hour, having a chat with the guys who I'll introduce in a minute. Feel free to send in questions. We will answer those questions at the end. The session is recorded, so if you want to listen in again, post the recording. It will be available on BrightTalk and our platform in roughly 2 hours' time. So thank you again. I'm joined today by Chris Ansara, who's founder and CEO of UK-based OutAv, by Alessandra Tonkia, who is head of strategy, private banking and wealth at InvestCloud, and by Josh Kogan, who's associate partner, head of banking UK at Simpulse. So, gentlemen, thanks for joining me. Josh, if I could start with you, just a quick introduction to yourself, your role, and maybe some opening perspectives on ESG and wealth management, which is, I think, what I forgot to say at the beginning. This is the topic we're talking about.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Stephen. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Josh Kogan. So, as Stephen said, I work for Simpulse Management Consulting, where I'm associate partner and head of banking here in the UK. So, for those of you who don't know Simpulse, we are a global boutique management consultancy focused on the financial services sector. And we have collectively, we've been working in the wealth management space for over 25 years. So real depth of knowledge in the space. We help clients through our consulting engagements from everything from kind of strategy straight down through to execution. And ESG, the topic today, is something which has been talked about and acted on within the sector for many years now, but really has picked up a lot of momentum in the last few years, and that trend is just continuing. So all of our clients is really front of mind for them. And one of the key points I'm going to want to get across today is really that ESG is not just a regulatory topic. It is potentially one of the greatest kind of propositional opportunities that we've seen in the sector for a very long time. So yeah, look forward to discussing it. And yeah, thanks again, Stephen. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome, Josh, and thank you. A nice thought there that it's one of the most interesting and biggest opportunities for the sector. So, Alessandra, if I can just come to you next, introduction to yourself, your role, and maybe a little bit of an opening statement on ESG and wealth management.
Yes, hello everyone. Alessandra Tonkia, based in London. I run strategy for InvestCloud Private Banking. As a group, InvestCloud is one of the largest providers of digital technology to wealth manager worldwide, with clients in more than 40 countries. And we do believe in the opportunity of ESG in those transformational terms that Josh was mentioning. And yes, there's a lot of regulatory pressure there, but there's a lot of passion from investors that sometimes use the ESG lens to decide which bank or wealth managers to work with. Some really expect rigorous methodology to make sure that their money is invested in something that is not only profitable, but good for the world. So there's definitely a lot of transformation. And this ESG wave is also requires very strong digital technologies to maintain those portfolios, to customize them, to make sure they're in line with your ESG passion. So we see both a business opportunity and a big technical need driven by this phenomenon.
Thank you, Alessandra. So if clients are choosing wealth managers based on ESG, then obviously a big issue. Finally, Chris, thanks for joining us. Can you give us a quick introduction to yourself, your business, and some opening statements on your view on ESG?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So my name is Chris. I'm the CEO and founder at UltAv. We're a London-based RegTech company, I guess with sustainability at our heart. And we help, our flagship product is called Doxtribute. And essentially what it does is it helps financial institutions send regulated or mandatory documents to their customers in a sustainable way. I think the guys touched on it already. Obviously, regulations driving change in the ESG space. and so is consumer needs. And I think both of those combined are really moving us to a place where sort of 5 years ago, ESG was very much about a nice to have or a cool currency, to almost like a mandatory, where I think firms really need to sit up and take notes, and we need to change our ways of working. So looking forward to the conversation and to chatting to you guys.
Great, thank you, Chris. Thank you all for the introduction. So if I didn't say it before, so we're looking at ESG, we're looking at its relevance in wealth management and how to push it further into the sector for clients' benefit and also obviously for wealth managers' benefit. But given the role of some of the panelists, we're very much looking at it also from the role of technology and how that can push this topic forward in the space. So as with all of our webinars, we try and break the topic down. So we're going to start looking a little bit at the backdrop and the market status first of all. So Alessandro, if I can come to you first. I know we've done some stuff on this in the past with you, but can you give us a little bit of a context of why this is important, why a wealth manager should care? What is the backdrop that has gotten us to the point that we're talking about this today?
So let's start with client first, which is always a good rule of thumb. Now we see people, especially the younger generation, are true believers that there is an emergency in the world, that there is, environmental issues, there's social issues, and what we learned in the past is that money can change things more than just goodwill declaration or even sometimes just political statement. So this idea of pushing money to something you believe in, especially in an environment like now where you might not have the usual profitability. So you want to make sure that the money does something positive that you feel good about. It's your way of contributing and giving back. So clients definitely want that. The new generation in high measures, all the stats out there says that people really care. Now, as a bank, you care because your clients care. Sometimes you also have a corporate responsibility, or you want to show that you're doing something good for the world as a bank, as a wealth manager. And the regulators care because, again, there's political pressure of channeling the money to the good causes, to solving problems that are huge for humanity. So there's definitely a macroeconomic set of alerts and pressures. And as Josh was saying, I think the wealth manager that will do it right, that will do it convincingly, will also have a chance to get asset under management coming to them, better capture the intergenerational change that is looming the horizon, and just have a much better profile on the market. And if you want maybe another topic that we are very passionate about, how does a wealth manager justify their fees? There's enough in ESG of doing due diligence, organizing portfolios, monitoring the quality of your investment, that you can tell clients, yes, you might have to pay 100 basis points, but I'll do a good job for you on an issue that you really care about.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, Alessandro. Josh, I don't know, two parts of the question. Firstly, would you add anything to what Alessandro has said in terms of drivers and the reasons that the industry should care? And second, does the industry care, or have you seen actions that say it's more than just a branding exercise, it's more than a tag that they can hang on to for marketing purposes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to kind of add on to what Alessandro said, I think even if you take a step back from the wealth management sector and just understand the origins of ESG as a whole, there are kind of two undeniable megatrends impacting all sectors and industries globally at the moment, right? And they're kind of the shift to online and digital, which has been happening for many years, and also the kind of increasing awareness of consumers in society of the impacts of kind of the ESG factors on the globe as a whole, right? And off the back of that, obviously we see governments signing up to very kind of wide-ranging agreements, such as the Paris Agreement, and they're realizing that the resources needed to make the shift kind of at a societal level to more sustainable development are kind of far bigger than what the public sector can do alone. Okay, so the financial sector therefore needs to play a very big role, and it can play a big role in terms of the intermediation of risks and investments that take into account ESG factors. So as Alessandro said, now we're seeing the kind of regulators step in. They see that these two big actors, the government and consumer demand, are kind of converging, and now it's time to act on both those. So we're seeing all the regulations come in, and I think wealth management naturally sits at the heart of both kind of government commitments to close the investment gap with regards to ESG, and also the increasing consumer demand to responsibly deploy capital to more sustainable or towards more sustainable goals. So I think that's kind of very important to understand from the backdrop. And then in terms of kind of, are we seeing wealth managers care? Definitely. I hear a lot of people, a lot of clients actually refer to ESG and try and compare it back to MiFID II, but that's a really dangerous route to go down, I think, because the key differentiator here is that ESG is being driven by the consumer as much as it is by the regulator. So wealth managers are being forced to care and forced to act, and yeah, we're definitely seeing some interesting propositions come through.
Thank you, Josh. So, Chris, there are some major drivers that make the industry move here. This is not something they can sit back and let pass them by. You've obviously got a product that's kind of built with significant ESG principles in mind. So does the industry realize the power of ESG from the perspective of the product that you're selling and the conversations that you're having?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think there's it's one thing to push your pension into a sustainable fund, for example. I think the other thing, the difficult part sometimes is actually changing your own ways of working within your organization and being sustainable within your operationals, your day-to-day operations. So I definitely see that the change in that. I see the firms that we speak to have a real drive to try and improve and reduce their carbon emissions. I think it kind of going back to what Josh was saying, sort of the broader context of the CSG theme and government's role in that. Of course, because of that, we're seeing a massive, correction in the economy in some ways. And so, because of the correction in the economy, there's new avenues and there's new places to invest in. And I think that the fund managers or the wealth managers have done a really good job in that. And you can pick your portfolio in terms of what societal or environmental issues you want to tackle, or what's closest to your heart. I think that's fantastic. So on the surface, I think it's great, but I think looking inward sometimes can be quite difficult, especially when you've got various old infrastructure in place, infrastructure that draws on energy and data centers that may be internal, that are cheap, more cost efficient and sustainable to run on the cloud. And there's various ways, of course, you can. Of course, our product does something slightly different using distributed ledger technology, but I think those conversations are definitely, people are having them and they're interested in understanding how they can reduce their carbon emissions. And I think it's really imperative just to start, and sometimes what we offer our customers is the lowest hanging fruit and easy way to start on that journey, and so that's where we see the wins.
Perfect. Alessandro, thinking of the application of technology in this area, there are kind of two sides to this. So there's the element of reducing the impact from the technology use and paperless processes, not sending out paper-based communication to clients and data warehouses and things such as Chris just mentioned. Then there's also the application of technology is just building and maintaining portfolios, communicating with clients around ESG. Is the industry up to pace in these areas, or is it ahead in terms of using ESG to deal with clients and build portfolios, and a little bit behind in terms of how its infrastructure impacts the world we live in?
I would say, again, because of client demand, the industry had to move and start acting, but I think a lot was maybe to assemble a product shelf that makes sense, that has a certain ESG credential. Where I think there's still work to do is to embed ESG into your standard investment process. First, again, because the client demanded. Second, because ESG is also about risk control. So some of that violating the E, the S, and the G exposes your portfolio investment to potential downsides. So understanding better how that risk management, how that understanding key fundamental features of the invested companies is key. And I think and that maybe the problem that we are trying to solve with most urgency is how you can also adjust ESG to specific client preferences. Now, I think ESG is a bit an unfortunate term for clients. The client cares about sustainability. More specifically, they might care about social justice, diversity, climate change, clean water. So how can you really take the individual passions of clients, the causes they're really willing to invest in with their heart, and drive intelligent, robust portfolio structuring, keeping those individual preferences in mind? I think that's a problem that the industry is still grappling with, but it's important to solve if you want to guarantee client satisfaction and if you want to create an added value for clients of giving them a portfolio that does exactly what they want to do with their money.
Yeah. Thank you, Alessandro. Josh, if we move on to look at sort of, we've talked a little bit about the status and the backdrop. We look at now a bit of challenges and opportunities. Picking up on what Alessandro said there, ESG is maybe a bit lumpy. It's not attractive. It's not personalized. You might care about climate change or equality or other issues. What is your view on where the industry goes there in terms of making this a story that's interesting to clients? So clients have demand, but is the industry kind of aligned with selling them what they want?
I think we're at the very early stages of the kind of the industry-wide ESG proposition being developed, right? So I think, as Alessandro said right now, most firms are near the kind of start of their ESG journey, and so are probably focused on incorporating ESG into the kind of investment decision process, right? And that is the base level requirement that the regulators are coming out with as we speak right now. But really, where I think we'll end up, and it will definitely take quite some time, is that ESG will be central to wealth management proposition as a whole, right? I think if you look back a decade, kind of impact investing and mission-driven investing was something that was probably restricted to private banks with their kind of philanthropy desks, and it was a bit of a luxury and a premium service. But now it's becoming essential, right, for the mass affluent investor. They want to understand the impact that their investments are having. So I think you move from this purely risk assessment kind of focus to a real end-to-end experience where customers are educated at the beginning through some very sophisticated research delivered to the client ahead of making any investment decision. And then I guess the North Star for any ESG proposition is that once you do make the investment, can you track that through to outcome? Right? With purely financial kind of focused investing, you can track that outcome, of course. You just track the financial metrics, but that is a lot more complicated when it comes to ESG. But that's where I think we will end up getting eventually.
Perfect. Fantastic, Chris. I'll come back to you in a minute. I just want to ask Alessandro one question, sort of on the application of technology. So, what are the elements here that need to be considered? So, you've got to build the portfolio, you've got to personalize the portfolio, you've got to communicate with clients, you have to manage the portfolio. What are the kind of elements that are critical in terms of the tech stack to deliver ESG to a wealth management business?
Well, first, you really need to capture the client profile, the client preferences, so being able to map the client on the axis of investment that are important to them, both explicitly with questions and implicitly by tracking what they read, what they do, which proposal they accept, which investment they make. So client profiling is one. Second, drive personalization. Again, find the securities that fit correctly into risk-return space, but really cater for the client priorities in terms of impact investment and sustainability. And third one, to monitor, because yes, most wealth managers would do a bit of due diligence before taking a security into their universe. But obviously, we've seen that scandals happen on a constant basis. So being able to capture those scandals, those downgrading from the analyst of the different companies, and being able to remediate and make sure that you don't keep money with a serial offender in the ESG space. I think, again, that's added value that a wealth manager can offer, telling the client, I'll make sure that you invest correctly and emotionally, systematically on day one, but also I'll keep you on track towards the right KPIs, the right financial and non-financial goals as your portfolio evolves and then as the markets change.
Fantastic. Chris, just thinking of your experience in selling a product that kind of has ESG principles built in, when you're engaging with wealth managers, I mean, are they thinking about the end experience of the client in your experience, or are they thinking more about the benefits of the product and its kind of ESG principles there, and how they can use that economically?
Yeah, I think they're definitely thinking about customers, and customers come first for most organizations. They put the customers first. I think, but in terms of the first part of your question, in terms of how do you get success in the space, when you think about operational, you're looking at an organization, how do you improve your ways of working to really look within yourself as a company? I think the key thing is that you need to define success metrics, and I think you need to get everybody, all the relevant stakeholders into a room and define those, much like you would do in developing your products. You'd look at it the same way and go, okay, what is our success metric? In our case, we reduce the reliance on paper, but we also do other things in terms of reducing the reliance on energy and other bits around our technology. But if you can define what does success, what good looks like, and you can allocate, define it in some way. So if, for example, it's 1,000 pages of paper, whatever it is, on a daily basis, what does that look like in trees? Something you can touch, something that's tangible. And quite often we find that that's quite an interesting way to approach the ESG, to almost like to give some sort of tangible success metric or target that you want to achieve. Of course, carbon emissions are massive, and I think, so when we're selling, it's often a number of benefits that we can offer. Sustainability needs to make sense, but from my experience, it needs to also make financial sense for an organization to drive change. So they're looking at improving their costs, they're looking at reducing cybercrime, they're looking at reducing all these other competing priorities. So if you've got a solution that can touch on all of these and do it in a cost-effective way, and then deliver ESG at the end, I think that you're halfway there. Of course, trying to get all the right people in the same room can sometimes be challenging though, and getting people aligned. But once you actually do that, you can see progress. If that answers the question.
Great.
I think
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Josh, so getting people aligned, right, it always comes back to that, doesn't it? Or often comes back to that. So we can talk technology, we can talk drivers, but the people who deliver this within the institution are key. So who are the stakeholders here? We've obviously got to consider investment managers, relationship managers, technology people, business people. Building an ESG proposition, who needs to be brought on board?
Yeah, so, I mean, if you think about the ESG proposition, it is an end-to-end proposition. So I think nobody is really excluded from this. Absolutely, the relationship managers are key, and the investment personnel, they have to be educated on ESG as a topic, but also the methodologies and investment strategies that wealth managers decide to deploy. On top of that, of course, you have people in the technology and digital departments. As I said earlier, the two mega trends of shift to online, digital, and ESG, they definitely go hand in hand. So I think those wealth managers who manage to get a kind of leading digital proposition around ESG will be the winners here. I have a good example actually of a client who has created a very kind of unique proprietary ESG platform, and what they've done is that they have pulled together a platform which allows bankers and investors to sit down with the client and discuss the ESG portfolios that they have within the firm, the ESG options. And what they've managed to do is that they essentially bring the clients through and connect it back to the UN sustainability goals. So they make it very kind of clear how their portfolios could align to the regulatory goals. And through that, Alessandro, I think, was saying earlier that it's such an emotional topic, right? We know that wealth managers and relationship managers in particular, part of their true value add is to manage that emotional journey. And this client has done fantastically well with this platform. They've kind of allowed the clients to get emotionally invested earlier, the relationship managers to guide them through that. And through the pilot of that platform so far, they've fed back that nearly all of the clients who have been brought through this journey have reallocated funds to the ESG funds offer. So I think everybody has to be included in order to get there. Everybody from technology, front office, investments, the whole team.
Perfect. Alessandro, let's try and wrap up a few of those things. I think when you mentioned the three elements, it was profiling the client, personalizing the sort of experience for them, and then monitoring it. I think of some of the things that Chris said, also as well as Josh said, it was about sort of storytelling and putting it in real pictures and real understanding, and then aligning it with specific goals such as those derived or produced by the UN. I mean, is the industry there yet? Is it selling product, or is it really personalizing and storytelling the experience and bringing investors into this environment where their emotions are understood, or where is the industry on that journey?
Yes, so it just started, and I think you capture the key difficulties. One is to get the private banker, the relationship manager, to understand the process, to capture that emotion, to empathize with it. So I think that's an important personal touch element that clients would certainly want to feel in their dialogue with the financial institution. But second one, there is another difficulty which is more philosophical, that in the past the industry worked with model portfolios, and you guys probably know the drill. You can be conservative, you can be moderate, you can be aggressive in your portfolio, and pretty much you get a canned portfolio that corresponds to one of those 5 categories and possible variation. Now here again, if myself and Josh, that could also be both conservative investors, but I care a lot for clean water and diversity. Josh cares for social justice and the climate change. Ideally, we should end up with very different portfolios, not just with the same model. So this ability to really customize at personal level, customize in a multidimensional way and not in your classic risk-return matrix, I think that's a considerable shift for the methodologies of the wealth manager. And again, it requires quite some heavy lifting from the underlying technology that manage your product universe and the way to assemble those individualized portfolios.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to come on to that again in a minute when we talk about sort of actions, delivery, success, and how to deliver it. Chris, I know from having spoken to you a few times before, there are some metrics involved here. So, the opportunity. So can we talk a little bit now about the opportunity from ESG, whether it be, internal metrics or client experience? What are the things that you can either deliver and or that you think the market can deliver from properly engaging in this area?
Yeah, I mean, I can really talk around paper use consumption. That's one area that I know well, obviously, from the line of business that we're in. But the industry as a whole, I think, still sends, I say the broad industry, the financial services industry, in the UK alone sends around 5.3 billion documents on an annual basis at a staggering cost of about £1.7 billion, and resulting in about 2.4 million trees being chopped down. So that's just in the UK. So it's really staggering. I think the wealth management and retail banking space account for about 458 million of those documents. So a considerable amount. So there's obviously still a heavy reliance on paper. So we see, especially when, and one of the reasons for this is around the regulatory requirements to send documents. So there's a regulation called the durable medium rule, and essentially what it's got to do with is how information is sent from a customer, and essentially what the regulator is trying to say is it needs to be sent from a financial institution to a customer in a way that it can't be changed. And so they say you've got to do it in paper or one of 6 digital durable mediums. Now, each one of these digital durable mediums has some sort of drawback. And as a result, what we tend to see is the industry fall back on paper, become the sort of the default option. Now, of course, you can distribute documents digitally, and it is done, but it's these drawbacks that tend to see some firms go back to paper. So one of the things that we built out when we built out DocTribute was really to consider how we built the technology in an energy efficient way, because essentially the basis of our technology is around distributed ledger technology, and it gets it's got a bad rap. Everyone thinks to blockchain and Bitcoin, things like that, and Ethereum and sort of the energy consumption. And the reality is that those ledgers take vast amounts of energy. And you'll see, Elon Musk recently, removed the payment method of Bitcoin from Tesla. And the reason he did that was because it's something like 850 kilowatts of energy per hour is consumed with transactions within Bitcoin. Now, when we built our distributed solution, there was no point in our solution being worse than the problem. We couldn't be consuming that amount of energy. So we actually use a ledger called Hedera. Now, Hedera is built in a different way. It's proof of stake versus proof of work. And so that means it's far more energy efficient. And there's these sorts of conscientious decisions that we're able to, we need to bear in mind. It's also, at the very heart of our business. And so we're able to have the same transaction, but we're able to do a transaction at 0.000170 kilowatts of energy per hour. And if you compare that to Visa, it's about 10% than a Visa transaction. And so it just goes to show that, when you're building out your technology, you need to be very mindful of how you're doing that. And so sometimes sometimes we just assume because we've gone digital, we actually be more efficient or more, but there are other things to consider. So I guess in summary, when you look at, sending a 60-page document like a mortgage or terms and conditions for wealth managers, for example, you're looking at roughly around 330 grams of carbon emissions that are released into the atmosphere through printing the paper, to produce the paper, to print, and then to post. And if you compare that to something like sending out an HTML, you're looking at about 40 grams of carbon emissions. And when you look at our product, we produce about 6 grams of carbon emissions. So you can really start to see those numbers add up. And when we talk to our customers, we very much dial that up, and we go, listen, we can reduce your carbon emissions, even though you think what you're doing is carbon efficient or energy efficient. Actually, there's even a more efficient way to do that. And I think we're starting to see technology, not just in hardware, being very conscious of this, and the software that drives that hardware as well. So there's a lot to consider in that ESG space around energy consumption going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the metrics available or out there, and the paper use is quite staggering, isn't it? But the industry does fall back on paper very clearly. Josh, I don't know whether, thinking about the opportunity, you can expand on perhaps some of the case study, the example you sent earlier, or just talk more generally about what the opportunity is here, because we know there are drivers, we know there's interest, we know there's movement. What does it mean in terms of profitability or wealth managers even surviving in the space?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I guess just look at kind of the last year that we've had, right? If you want to look at the opportunity and the instigator for ESG becoming front of mind for all consumers, we know it's been a crazy year, but really, if you look at it, we've had this perfect storm of the kind of global economic fallout from COVID-19. As Alessandro said, a renewed political focus on social issues such as Black Lives Matter, workers on the gig economy, executive compensation, and then you look at the climate, right, and all the wildfires across all the different continents and the floods that we're seeing on the continent today and in China. And that has just focused everybody's mind on ESG. So all of a sudden, in such a short period of time, this has become front of mind for a very high percentage of clients. And if you put that together with the fact that the generational shift is underway, as a millennial, I can tell you that everybody is, has this front of their mind. So I think the opportunity is that this ESG can be a true propositional differentiator, right? If you put this at the heart of your proposition, it can really attract new money, right? We know that there's a fight for the kind of millennial pound underway, and I think this is going to be a key factor in choosing your wealth manager of the future.
Fantastic. Alessandro, if I come to you, one of the things that you often hear about is, well, millennials, yes, they're interested, yes, the market is changing, yes, there are new expectations, but they don't have any money, at least in comparison to older generations. So Is the opportunity also there among the older generation, those who have the assets now? Is that the experience that you have or that the research suggests?
I think probably if you look at research, there might be decreased interest, maybe depending on the age, or decreasing with age, but still the assets under management are looking for a sustainable home is still very high. And some people might be more driven by sheer passion and dedication and voting with their wallet. Other people will do it out of very sound economical motives. That again, understanding that if you invest in car manufacturers that are not moving to electric, those companies will not be very profitable in the future. So again, if you're looking to a company that has poor governance and keep getting embroiled in scandals, the share price will suffer. So there's a pull, an idealistic, passionate pull, but there's also a push which has to do with numbers and viabilities of business models in the future. So you might, in the maybe the more rational type of investor that wealth manager have, that is still top of mind for different reasons, but equally good reasons. So again, it's not just a style. It should, I think Josh said it very well, it should really be baked into your investment process.
Yep. Chris, from your perspective, what would be the number one or the top drivers to make a firm move now? So let's say they're not doing anything or they're not moving very fast. What would you say to them, or what do you say to them to say, hey, times are changing, you need to act around ESG principles? Are there things that you experience in your relationships with clients, sales and prospects?
Yeah, I think it's worth acknowledging that most firms are in some sort of digital transformation. There's very seldom we'll meet someone that's still reliant on paper. And it just depends on what stages they're at and where they're at in that process, depending on and what might motivate them and might drive them. So in some instances, the thing about our product is we look at delivering documents in a much safer way. So sometimes it's around cybercrime. So we might be talking around cybersecurity, and that might be a driver for change from them. Because they might not necessarily be heavily reliant on paper as an organization. So other firms they might be relying on sending out documents via HTML, and that might be increasing the likelihood of carbon emissions or the deficiencies around that. So we might talk to them around deficiencies. So I think it's finding for us, it's I guess it's different strokes for different companies, but for us, obviously, we need to find what pulls the triggers for those organizations. And of course, for us, the lowest hanging fruit is where people are still heavily reliant on paper because of the regulation, and they're still having to distribute this paper. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, they don't want to be adding to the carbon emissions. And internally, if they can make a change, I think it's an emotive reason for making a change. And I think often those emotive reasons are a lot stronger than some of the others. But ultimately, it often boils down to cost. And if we can demonstrate that we can save you money and return a good investment in terms of your ESG profile and reducing your reliance on certain things and reducing your carbon emissions, then I think it's a win-win, and that's where we start to see the real traction, where we can deliver both, and that's where we try to focus on.
Alessandro, if I just come back to you, what do you see as the trigger? So there's all these pressures, there's these trends. We know it's happening, we know it's coming, we know there's digitalization, we know clients want different things, they want more transparency, more personalization, so on and so forth. What do you find is the trigger for a wealth manager to do something? And perhaps, what then is the next step that they typically take or that they should take?
Well, as everything in business, it's definitely strategy. Where do you want to go? Who do you want to be perceived at? And we've seen it with past regulatory needs. Some wealth managers decided very consciously to just do the minimum necessary to get above the regulatory threshold. Other wealth managers that almost decided to make that necessity into a virtue. And in the same way, we've seen, if MiFID is about consumer protection, some wealth managers said, I'm going to protect you even more. I'm going to disclose more that I need. And here, if ESG is about, protecting your portfolio, protecting the world at some level, the wealth managers will embrace it and disclose more, give you better analytics, give you better adherence to your passion, will be able to position their brand in a certain space. And if in that space you might be able to acquire a new client or make your client more satisfied. Again, it's a strategic decision at the end. The pressure there, will wealth managers that are passive on those teams survive? Possibly, but there's definitely space for differentiation. There's space to put your own imprint on a certain style of doing wealth management. And yes, maybe we could argue that in the future, that style is going to be prevalent.
Yep. Josh, where do you think the main focus should be in terms of delivering this? Is this about understanding the client? Is it about having the product set? Is it about having the technology in place? You've mentioned this being real front to back all the way through kind of proposition involving everyone. So what's the crux of delivering a ESG proposition that's going to work for the client, the wealth manager, and ultimately their businesses?
Yeah, so as you said earlier, the regulations are still evolving, right? So that is kind of still largely unknown exactly what is kind of needed from a regulatory standpoint, and there's a lot of alignment between different markets and geographies in terms of how this is going to be treated. So the one thing you can be sure of is that what you implement today is not going to be the end product, right? This is going to continue to evolve for years, right? And continue to be the focus for years. I think it will only increase in importance. So with that in mind, Stephen, we were on here 2 months ago speaking about the importance of agility and business agility within wealth management. This is a prime example of why that's important. I think the most important thing right now is that wealth managers get started, that they do not wait until the regulators have it fully stipulated what is needed. And they understand that ESG is not just a regulation, it's actually, for your clients, it's actually a personal belief system, right? As Alessandro said, they're passionate about ESG or all of them. And so any efforts you put in now in terms of bringing products to market, improving processes, I think you're going to be rewarded for, right? Get ESG, start talking about it with clients and bringing your processes up to speed to enable that. And I think you'll start to get out in front. You just got on mute, Stephen.
It had to happen. So I did another webinar this morning on trade finance, not exactly my topic of expertise, but it was very much that the regulator is now taking a much more active role with the industry in determining what needs to be done to digitalize the process of trade finance. So is the regulator, not only is it active in pushing regulations around this area, but is it engaging with the market to determine what should and shouldn't be done? Is that your experience so far, or is it a more distant relationship?
No, that they definitely are engaging, and I think the wealth management industry as a whole has actually always been very good at that, right? So the wealth management industry is approaching ESG, I wouldn't say slowly, but definitely cautiously, as they do with most regulations, sometimes very rightfully so. But the industry does get together under the various associations and face off with the regulator. And I think there's good communication there. And that you can see in the regulations coming through. So the UK have already put out their regulation back in March. So there's definitely good communication between market and regulator. And I think going forward, the UK are going to stay at the forefront of the ESG regulation. So I think domestically we'll be first movers.
Okay, fantastic. Alessandro, if we just look specifically now at the technological roles here, you obviously mentioned earlier sort of 3 processes. If I go back to my notes, it was really around profiling, personalization, and monitoring. So we want to employ technology to improve this process, to scale it, and to deliver the things that we can't as individuals because it's too complex. where should a wealth manager focus now? I mean, I don't know whether you can talk sort of generically that they should all look at these areas or whether it is very much case by case. But I mean, are we talking about CRM systems? Are we talking about data collection? Are we talking about AI? What are the technology tools and capabilities that are the crux of this?
I think there's definitely, if you take profiling, you can make it very simple. It could be extend your questionnaire to capture those sustainability preferences in your client profile. You can become more sophisticated by using AI to mine behavior and extract preferences automatically, because then they will be more up to date. There's going to be less questioning of the client. It's going to be a much more natural way of discover client intent. The hard one, I think, is the portfolio bit, how you then match those preferences to specific portfolio investments, because it means defining a taxonomy, using the taxonomy to profile the client and to profile the product. Obviously, you have data providers that will help you with give you very specific rating of products along different dimension, but you still probably want to tweak it in a way that makes it coherent and in line with your drivers. So there's a bit of heavy lifting there in this nexus, of this hinge between client preferences and product features. And the last one is the monitoring. That's the one that needs to be more timely. Again, some share in your portfolio was downgraded either purely financially or because of their ESG behavior or ESG violations. Maybe some news break out about that company engaging in unlawful practices or using child labor, whatever it is. So that's probably something that if you want to demonstrate rigor and value to your client, you need to have the technology that allows you to be on top of things almost in real time. Otherwise, you might suffer the embarrassment of the client finding out before you do. And in any case, if you really want to run a tight portfolio ship, you need to have that ability to monitor as real time as possible. So I think on each of those pillars, you can have a basic solution, but I'm sure the wealth managers that want to be top of class, they can really reach into a deep technical stack that will allow them to automate a lot of the relevant processes.
Doing it again. A follow-up question on that. Where do they focus now? I mean, do they work across these three streams simultaneously, or do they work on the sort of the client understanding piece first of all, the sort of CRM and onboarding piece? Is that where you mentioned it's probably the easiest win because they can adapt a client profiling questionnaire? Is that where they start, or?
Yeah, I would say the three pillars, client profiling and portfolio assembly, are the key drivers. That's where you would start in a logical flow. Profiling the client accurately will allow you maybe to better shape your product offering to make sure that you cater to those client preferences. But also you don't want to profile the client too much and then not being able to provide something to match that categorization or personalization. So I would say client profiling and portfolio shaping are the first port of call, and maybe monitoring can follow in a second phase. Obviously, as technology providers, we always recommend our clients to work incrementally, to have some quick wins, because it educates the organization, it socializes certain processes, it allows you to get feedback from clients, and then you can progress with the subsequent phases when you have a more mature understanding of what's going on. So that's...
Thank you, Alessandro. Chris, I suppose as a technology that maybe sits on top of some of these other pieces, do you have a viewpoint on whether the industry is well equipped to deliver what it should be doing in terms of ESG personalization, profiling, portfolio building, and obviously then reporting?
Yeah, I think the thing is that there's two types of technology, and I think firstly you need to kind of look at each organization. Each organization is different, right? So some organizations have a legacy technology that they need to build on, and they add on that kind of trips them up a little bit, and others are a little bit more further down the road. Now, the other things that you look at is we work very much on the operational side of the technology side, so it's the fulfillment side, and I think a lot of the emphasis and the attention has been put on the selling side, if you want, for a better word, on the front end to get that consumer behavior and build out those portals that can really understand their consumers better and engage with customer engagement. So I think it just depends on which part of the organization, which organization it is, but generally we have to acknowledge that we have to work within existing platforms. There's no ways we're going to be successful as an organization if we go in and we want to try and completely overturn or add some massive infrastructure into an organization. So we've built very much as a bolt-on, and that suits us and that suits our style. And I think organizations are quite open to that. If they can enhance and they can see the benefits, they're happy to work with organizations that can improve their solutions. So it's, there's so many transformation projects going on at the moment, and there's so many different objectives and needs. So it's quite a broad thing to answer directly, but I definitely feel that the engagement side is great. It feels like that's really been progressive. It's maybe sometimes the back end part where I work on that sometimes is less profitable and therefore relies on some legacy systems.
Perfect. Josh, obviously, as a consultant, you'll be speaking to numerous firms about their ESG proposition, building it from scratch, improving what they've got. Thinking to Alessandro's points of the 3 pillars, and perhaps more broadly, if possible, around technology infrastructure. Where are the blockers? Where is the industry focused in delivering something, and maybe where do they fall down in terms of, is it data, is it client details, is it profiling, personalization, is it the product set, the taxonomy?
There are quite a few, right? So a colleague told me yesterday that from their research they've seen that there's over 5,000 ESG specific KPIs out there globally now, right? And I think they kind of termed it like an alphabet soup of KPIs and indicators, right? So there's challenges on both the wealth manager side and the investor end user side. On the wealth manager side, I think the biggest challenge in getting the proposition cleared is being able to accurately collect, extract and measure relevant ESG information, right? And then on the consumer side or the client side, given the different taxonomies and the kind of duplication of KPIs out there, how can they actually compare like for like, right? And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge at an industry level is, and to be fair, the role of the regulator coming in to clarify that. So I think definitely the data side is a huge issue for the industry as a whole. And that will take time to play out also. You have a lot of standards that have been out there for a very long time, and trying to narrow them down to a decisive few will naturally take time. But while you're waiting for all of these regulations to be clarified, there's nothing stopping you from getting started. As you said, I think Alessandro said you can start on client profiling, and to a small degree, but you can also start on elements like research. What's stopping you from going to your clients with relevant ESG research today, starting to educate them, giving your relationship managers some early exposure to having those conversations just through research? And then by the time the investment process is ready to go, they'll be in a much better position. There's lots you can do.
Okay, fantastic. You've just destroyed my next question, Josh, actually, because I hadn't really heard too much talk of the relationship manager stroke the advisor in this conversation. So I wondered if, but you've just obviously thrown that in. So I was going to ask Alessandro, and I still will, but to what extent the advisor is bypassed here, because there's so much data, there's a huge taxonomy, there's a lot of tech being involved. Is the advisor still sat in the middle of this, or are they to some degree bypassed by the things that need to happen to deliver ESG effectively to clients, specifically if it's personalized?
Absolutely, they're central to this. If I was an advisor, I'd be looking at ESG as a form of job security, right? As I said earlier, it's this emotional belief system, and relationship managers are absolutely necessary to manage that emotion of the client and really guide them through that process. So I think all the tools that are developed, you know, of course you have digital-only propositions, but certainly for the private banks and high net worth wealth managers, you know, the tools have to be developed to enable the advisor, and they should be excited to really start building out an ESG proposition and start talking with clients.
Perfect. Thank you, Josh. Well, gentlemen, we've got 4 minutes left, so let's just, if we can, have a sort of final concluding, maybe future-looking perspective from each of you. So, Alessandra, maybe you can sum up in terms of where you see the industry now and where you see the industry in 2 to 3 years' time in terms of its ESG proposition, and if necessary, what the constituent parts of that will be.
Yeah, maybe going back to the question you asked, Josh. So we will see clients demanding more intelligent guidance on their ESG goals and passion, on in general their personal concerns about financial planning and the evolution of their investment. So again, DRM is crucial to build a narrative, to communicate, to educate, to provide a firm hand and that guidance. I think to do their job correctly, to satisfy clients, the advisor will need all the help they can get in terms of technology that distills the raw ingredients of the recipe, so that then they can tell the right story on top of that, but working on firm ground. And to have a technology that is up to par to the challenge. Yes, you need better insights on the client. You need a better understanding of your product catalog, as it were, and the ability to manufacture something that is unique to that client preferences in ESG space, but in general. All this technological machinery is relevant if you embrace ESG, if you just want to provide better service to your client. So understanding clients, understanding product, monitoring developments in the client circumstances, in the portfolio profitability are all basic ingredients that you need to implement as effectively, as industrial as possible, especially if you want to have that high touch in the advisor-client relationship, because that high touch needs some machinery behind the scenes to look effortless, to look elegant, to look insightful, to look timely in its delivery.
Fantastic. So very much a technology-enabled relationship manager. Fantastic. Chris, final points, concluding points, a little look to the future. What kind of things could you tell us about where you think this is going?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to it. So obviously you want to build brand affinity, and everything the guys have spoken about today is helping do that, but also understanding that, sustainable investing is profitable as well, and communicating that to your customers. I obviously I would always take it back internally, because that's the space that I work in, and I think building brand affinity is one thing in terms of outwards, but also you can build it internally by having sure that you've got the right processes in place, and that you as yourself as an organization are meeting your objectives and your sustainability goals. So I think that's one thing to bear in mind. And then I think the other thing is it's really important, and I touched on it earlier, is to set the success metrics. What is it that you want to achieve in ESG internally, and then start, because there's a long road, and there's a lot of firms doing some fantastic things internally. There's amazing organizations like B Corp and all sorts of other things that are much broader than just the space that we work in. But yeah, for me, it's about setting success metrics early on.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. Josh, a quick concluding point from you, if I may.
Yeah, I guess the only thing to add on to the two chaps is, it is definitely don't treat it as a tick box exercise. It's a huge opportunity for players in the industry, and something that if you get right and you invest appropriately in over the next few years, it can really set you up for the long term. ESG is, in my view, going to become more and more essential to the wealth management proposition. So give it due focus, get excited about it, and build a good proposition.
Fantastic. Awesome. So Alessandro, Chris, Josh, thank you very much for the time. We've hit the hour. So for the audience, thanks again for listening in. A quick few concluding points from me. So it's, as Chris said, get on and do it now, right? Don't wait. I think Josh said very much the same earlier. This is a massive opportunity for the industry. It's ESG, but it could just be the wealth management model of the future. And technology, whether direct to the client or enabling the advisor, as has been touched on, is key. So we look forward to doing more. Thank you again, Josh, Alessandro, Chris. Much appreciated. The session will be recorded and available soon. Any questions from the audience that we can handle after the session, let me know. But thank you again, and we wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.